About a month ago, Dave out in California sent me a dimple lock, and all handmade, just beautiful work. I'll put the link to the video down there. By a lot of trial and error experimentation, I was able to get it open. So Dave went back to the drawing board with a completely new design, and this is what we get. When you combine an incredibly fertile imagination with crazy wild machining skills, this is what you get. And I think Dave probably took some older designs. Here's what your key looks like, by the way. I was not able to pick this after probably more than 20 hours of trying all kinds of different techniques. Anyway, slides in and just beautiful, like it's mounted on ball bearings. The precision on this is just amazing. But before we take a look at this guy, I thought several of you, and myself included, might find it interesting to take a look at some earlier designs that have some similarities with this lock. Those are possibly ideas that Dave looked at, thought, oh, that's a good idea, and he picked and chose from different earlier designs and combined everything into this one and then added a couple of twists of his own to make, at least insofar as I'm concerned, unpickable. Let's take a look. All right, one of the locks I think Dave probably got some of his ideas from is this one. This has been living in the lock lab now for years in my naughty bucket. I've got well over 100 hours in attempting to pick this one. Never got it open a single time. There is a guy in Poland, in fact, I talked to him via email and Google Translate, that has a hand-designed, custom-made tool that's designed to pick these and also decode them. Unfortunately, because of the language barrier and the cost, many thousands of euros that he wants for that tool, I was never able to get one just to open this guy, and it certainly wouldn't be economical. But anyway, the Gerda, and this is a dimple lock, and it has the dimples on 4 sides, so we're looking at a total of 16 pins in this guy. When we line them up, you can see this little nib sticking out here, and that engages into that slot. So we're able to tension this without too much trouble, but being able to tension it and work it and pick it, yeah, that's the gap I wasn't able to bridge. So yeah, awesome lock, but you'll notice that, if I get that key back out of there, all the pins are in a row with each other. So 4 banks of 4 pins, total of 16 pins. They all line up perfectly. Let's take a look at another lock with some different design elements. All right, another lock that I think Dave might have gotten a couple of his ideas from is a company called Super Bright. And maybe not by coincidence, here's the wrapper. This is sold by a company in Los Angeles. So Dave's from California, this came out of California, a little coincidence there, I guess. Super Bright's an interesting lock. They don't make these anymore, but it is also a tubular lock, but you'll notice that there's no tensioner on the outside. The tensioner is buried deep inside of this lock. This does not contain security pins, and I was able to pick this in a video a couple of years ago when I first got it. Here is the notch for the tensioner, and we'll take a look at that in a minute, but it has to be aligned. The key can only go in one way, and it's not really marked, so just line it up with a drain hole, I suppose. Slide it in, and it works beautifully. So let's take a look at the core on this, because this is really where the design ideas might have come from. If you put the tensioner on the outside where a picker can get at it, it's kind of hit to his advantage. So if you put it on the inside, it's going to be problematic to try to tension it. Then you've got to figure out how to pick it. Luckily, this SB only had 9 pins, and none of these were security pins. That little screw right there is the tensioner, the tensioning screw that lines up with that bolt, and it actually does 2 things. When we slide the key in there, it allows us to turn the core, of course, to unlock it, but probably just as importantly, it makes sure that all the pins are perfectly lined up. It can't go in any other way, and of course, that's what you want. When you look at this, you might say, well, there's some defects on this. These holes don't line up. And to the casual observer, that may be true, but believe me, that's on purpose. If you have this many pins inside of a lock and you start rotating it, you don't want the wrong driver pin to fall into the wrong keyhole. Otherwise, it seizes up and you'll never get out. So just one more thing to think about when you start adding a whole bunch of pins to a tubular lock. All right, we've come full circle. We're back to Dave's lock, and I think now you can start to appreciate some of the improvements that Dave made to this, some anti-picking design elements. First of all, on the outside of this, there are no tensioner. The tensioner is buried deep in the back of this lock, and you can see that from the key. So right there would be your tensioner. Big, thick hole in that key, and that's because we had a very thick post that does not rotate, so you can't use him to tension. down the center of this to rob us of room to manipulate our pick inside of there. So really great insofar as that's concerned. As I said, this thing is just perfectly smooth. When I rotate this, those pins, as you can see, they're all offset from each other, both aligned this way and also aligned this way, so that when I rotate it, none of them fall into each other. And I imagine that was quite a headache to do for Dave. 14 pins, 7 banks of 2. So he's got them numbered here so that when I take this apart, there's 14 right there. When I take this apart, hopefully we'll be able to keep it all sorted. Yeah, so the biggest challenge of this, the first full day, at least the first full day, was trying to figure out how to tension it. Of course, you know, Bill, I tried the easy method first. So I tried first just taking a piece of windshield wiper insert, sticking it in there, and I knew where the slot was because I could feel it. But unfortunately, when that rotated, it ended up rotating enough, doesn't fit tightly enough, ended up blocking some of my pins. Reject. Designed a wider one, made this one out of brass. Again, same problem. It fits a little tighter, but it rotated just enough to block access to pins on the left side. Moving up, stainless steel, a little nicer, made out of wider tubing, so the curvature is right. It fit in there, but again, it just barely turns a little bit, but it was enough to block those 2 pins. So the tensioner has to be so incredibly precise. The way I ended up doing it was taking a piece of rod and smashing it, and I just kept widening it. I give it a hit, put it in, try it, give it a hit, put it in, try it, until finally I was able to get it so that it would wedge in there just perfectly to tension from the rear of the lock. And at that point, I realized I had a big problem because that was the first time I stuck the pick in. Let me get the lock cam and show you the problems that I was facing. All right, got this mounted up so it doesn't bounce around. Let's take a look at this guy. Slide this dude in there and try to get it focused. All right, when we look in there, the first thing you might notice is that these pins are actually overlapping each other. They're a little bit deeper, so this kind of reminds me of a Caba style lock. They're right up against that center shaft, and they overlap one another. In Dave's letter, he said his design was intended that the pins would act as their own warding. So they overlap all the way around. There is an opening on the very bottom. There's a little gap right there. The light isn't going back far enough, but back there you would probably find your tensioning hole. This gap is slightly wider. You can see all the rest of them are overlapping each other. You're not getting back there with anything without bouncing against at least 2 of the other pins. Just really, really nasty. Very well thought out. All right, let me briefly talk about some of the attacks that I made on this. As I said, half of my time was spent finding a tensioner and getting it perfectly dimensioned so that I could tension the lock. Once I got that, then my problems really started, because now I realized I was going to have a heck of a time picking it because of the way that those pins were laid out. I didn't give up. I jumped right on this guy, figuring with 14 pins, sometimes you can rake them, but because we've got security pins in this guy, I wasn't able to get anything. I also was not even able to get any kind of feedback or fault set. Probably due to 2 things: the precision of the lock, first of all, and secondly, 14 pins. So even if you set 2 or 3, it may not be enough to give you that feedback, which is so critical to being able to pick a lock. So I raked on it for hours and I got nothing. I tried both directions. Yeah, nothing. Next, of course, was single pin picking. So I tried that as well. I found that I was starting to overset all the pins in the front as I was reaching for the ones in the back. Again, that's probably by intent when Dave built this. You notice a lot of the pins up in the very front are very deep cuts. All those would act as gatekeepers. So if you're trying to reach that high cut one back there, you're probably going to overset him as well as 1 or 2 on each side. So really, really nasty stuff. All right, so I realized I wasn't going to be able to single pin pick him, so I was looking for a way to cheat. No way to shim this guy, or is there? I thought overlifting might be the way to go. So I got a piece of stainless steel tube, cut it down, and I cut a slot in the middle to maintain tension. No way to bump it, remember, the tension's from the rear. So we slide this dude, let me take that tensioner out. So slide him in and wiggle him in, and what happens is he'll push all those pins out to about their maximum. Take your tensioner, slide him down that little cut groove, get everything tensioned, put incredible tension on it, pull this guy out, and theoretically, that would leave all the pins locked at the maximum. Then you could release tension while you're raking. The problem is, you probably heard it when I pulled this out, half of those pins fell back down. And as soon as I started to release, very little tension and the other half fall down. I mean, just the precision on this is so tight that the tiniest amount of tension release causes the remainder of those pins to fall down. There was never a chance, I don't think, to get overlift to work. So this guy has beat me, absolutely. All right, Dave, I got to say, fantastic job. The precision, you're a true artist when it comes to locks, machining, and lock design. If you're interested in the pinning, stick around. Otherwise, Dave, here's what I'm going to do for you. I am going to return your lock, obviously, and I'm also going to give you this to get him out of my naughty bucket. He's mocked me long enough. I'll probably never get this Titan picked, so I may as well send him to you because you appreciate the design of it. I'll also throw in the SB because I think you probably got some of your rear tensioning ideas and pin layout from him as well. This is going to be coming back to you. So if you're interested in gutting, stick around. I'm going to gut this guy and see what Dave put on the inside. All right, all I'm going to do is take these out in numerical order and put them in these different slots. I'm going to fast forward it so the video is not going to be crazy long. It is still completely intact, and of course, it still works perfectly. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, let's try to take a close look at this without disturbing too many things here. Dave wasn't lying. We have just an incredible array of different kind of security pins. So chamber 1, we ended up with a spool. Notice the springs, or many of them are different as well, so Dave really wasn't taking any chances. So spool, we got a standard, we got a serrated, a baby spool, baby spool here. These are tapered pins. We have a serrated here, a spool. Chamber 9, we have it looks like a homemade, kind of a serrated pin, kind of a mix between a serrated and a spool. We have 2 T-pins in chamber number 10. 11, oddly standard. What's he doing here? A spool in 12. We have a serrated in 13, and then spool in 14. Your chances of getting into this are like zip, I think. The workmanship on this is just incredible. The reason I'm looking at this is to see if Dave really took any chances and put any kind of undercutting in there, and I don't see any. That would really, I mean, it was impossible enough, right? Notice a wide gap right here, and that's where the tensioner was, which is what we're going to talk about in just a moment. Put him right here, and the inside, not a lot to look at inside of here. The only thing I would expect is maybe a sidebar. That would really throw things off. All right, let's talk about the tensioner. If there is a single thing on this, I think that would maybe give it a vulnerability. It is the, let me grab the key. It is the tensioner. The tensioner on here, this is a perfectly clean access to where the tensioner allowed me to hand make a tensioner. What I would say is if there were a row of pins, maybe this row was moved over in this direction just a little bit to obstruct that access way to the tensioner, then it would make it impossible to tension it. That would be the only recommendation I could possibly make. But since I couldn't pick this, I certainly couldn't pick the other one. Anyway, guys, appreciate your time. Stay safe, stay legal. If you like the design of this lock, and I don't see how you can't, give Dave a little plus up down there in the comments. Thanks, guys.